Father in heaven, thank you so much for this day. Again, thank you for the chance to be here. I pray that you would fill each of us with your Spirit so that our hearts and our minds can be opened. I pray that the words that I say are your words, that they come from you, and that you can help them penetrate our hearts and go deeply into our lives. We love you, Lord. Amen. Well, you may not have noticed, but a week ago, we had some pretty big stuff happen.
Which one?
Yeah. Well, we had the storms, but we also had the inauguration, right? A transition of power. One group of people with a one vision for the country replaced by another group of people with a very different vision of the country. If you're anything like me and you go on social media, you see all sorts of chaos, all sorts of crazy. I have cousins who took pictures of themselves marching, who post memes, with pretty terrible things to say about Trump voters. I have uncles who make fun of the people who marched and who post memes of people who don't like Trump. I have aunts posting things saying, everybody please, let's just be nice to each other. It's just chaos, right? And I know I love following politics. It's kind of, some people follow football. I enjoy politics. But I would say even myself, I'm getting to the point where it's a little much. It's a little crazy. Let's just calm down here, guys. But I will say this. As overwhelming as sometimes it can be, when you look at the world before our time, when you go back very far at all, it makes you appreciate the fact that we had such a major shift in the group of people leading the country, and there was no bloodshed. Like any time before now, if you put what just happened back into the ancient times, the first thing that President Trump would have done is to execute Obama and his family and all of his major cabinet leaders, to execute Hillary and her family and all of her major campaign leaders. Everybody who voted for Hillary would have been under suspicion, if not executed themselves. There would have been a major civil war. There would have been violence and upheaval, some sort of coup, chaos. And so even as we are frustrated by some of the stuff we see on social media, for me personally, it gives me peace to put it in that kind of context. That we have as peaceful of a country as we do at this time. The story we're looking at today, sadly, they don't have that benefit, because they're living through a time of transition as well. Turn with me to 2 Samuel. It's a time of transition, but it's a time of transition before peaceful transition became a thing. It's a time of violence and civil war and people being caught in the midst of danger and not having any power to deal with that danger. Go to 2 Samuel chapter 4 to kind of start the story. 2 Samuel chapter 4. So just a bit of background. Israel has become, that they have gone from Egypt to the Promised Land. After they got to the Promised Land, for a series of years, they really had no centralized government. They had tribal leaders and what they called judges that would kind of come up and defend them from their adversaries. And that time itself was pretty chaotic. And they came along and they said, we want a king. We want somebody that's strong, that can give us a cohesive nation. And so God anoints Saul. And I'm going to move that a little bit. God anoints Saul to be the first king of Israel. Saul does that. If you know the story very well, Saul starts out pretty good. He has a few fatal flaws, though, and those lead to his downfall. And so we pick this story up, seeing the effects, really, the effects of bad decisions, especially that leaders have on the people around them. Check out 4, verse 4, 2 Samuel chapter 4, verse 4. It says this: Jonathan the son of Saul, had a son who was lame in both feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. His nurse picked him up and fled, but as she hurried to leave, he fell and became crippled. His name was Mephibosheth, which is a fun name to say 5 times fast. His name was Mephibosheth. So you hear this story, and you can imagine a 5-year-old boy who's destined, politically speaking at least, to be the next king. He's the son of the heir, the current heir, and so everybody looking on would say this is the prince. So Jonathan and Saul, along with several other of Saul's sons, are killed in a major battle with the Philistines. They're killed. The head of the nation at this time is gone. He's been destroyed, along with his army. The Philistines have defeated everything really that kept Israel together at this time. And the news comes to the palace where Mephibosheth is, and the nurses ordered, get him out of here. Go, you have to leave. We don't know what's coming. The Philistines could be right on the door. If they do, if they decide they want to take out the royal family, this kid, this heir to the throne in their minds, of course God had anointed David, but he is the next in line, take him and run. And so she does. And on the way to wherever they were running, something happens. She slips maybe, or he's too heavy for her, or something. But she drops him. He falls. And we don't know exactly how the injury happened, but somehow he's injured. And that injury leads to a crippled child. He can't walk. Could be that he broke his legs and there were no doctors to fix them, so they set wrong. Could be that he broke his back, and so so he was paralyzed. We don't really know, but we do know this. Because of an accident, this boy is now crippled. He's supposed to be the prince, but now instead of being the prince, his expectations being that, he's now a helpless pawn as there is chaos going on around him. He has no ability to affect anything happening as he grows up, because there's a good 7.5 years, according to the Bible, between this moment and when David takes the throne. 7.5 years of civil war, of political intrigues, of assassinations, of all sorts of danger. And this boy, Mephibosheth, is subject to it all. He can't do a thing. He's simply at the whims of the political realities surrounding him. I think sometimes we've all been there. We've all felt that frustration, that concern, that worry, being a helpless individual surrounded by things that are happening that are completely out of our control and yet have a huge impact on our own lives. We've been there. We've felt that fear. There's no greater fear, I don't think, than that sort of fear, where it's not something that there's no logical repayment. You did something wrong, and so something bad is happening to you. This is just happening, and I have no way to stop it. So he grows up like this. He grows up like this. As a cripple, he has nothing to offer his family. As a cripple, some people would have looked at him and said, "You must be God has punished you for the sins of Saul. You are in some ways a disgrace in some ways, because you can't bring honor back to the name of Saul, to the lineage of Saul. You're never going to be a warrior. You're never going to be a producer. You're never going to be a provider. You are dependent on everyone else." We pick up the story a few years later, because this is really where we want to focus. This is setting up this tragic young man, Mephibosheth. For 15 years or so, he lives this way. He grows up, and we pick the story up a few chapters later in 2 Samuel chapter 9. 2 Samuel chapter 9. 15 years have passed, as I said. David has conquered. All the civil wars have been over for a while now. David has become king. He is the prophesied or the anointed king, made king now in Israel. It is a fact. He has conquered Jerusalem. He has brought the tabernacle to Jerusalem, conquered the Philistines. David cannot lose right now. He's at the top of his game, at the pinnacle of his success. And so at this point, he returns to a promise he made many years before. A promise he'd made to his best friend at the time, Jonathan, the crown prince of Israel. Jonathan, the one person who seems to understand in this whole picture that David is going to be the king. Jonathan, even though he has the legal right to it, is not. And Jonathan makes David promise, when you become king, don't kill my family. That's a big promise. See, politically speaking, the quotes, politically correct thing to do for David is to kill all of Saul's family. And this isn't because of the threat on David's life. David's a strong king. But what happens when David's son or grandson comes to the throne and people go, we don't like this king. I wonder if there's a son of Saul somewhere out there. If Saul's line continues, somewhere down the line, they could become a threat to David and his dynasty and his line. So the right thing to do from a political perspective in this case is to search out anybody who could be an heir or could have an heir later on and end their life. And so David calls people together and says, hey guys, I want you to find anybody, any living descendants of Saul. And if you pick it up, David asks, verse 1 in chapter 9, is there anyone still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake? So they call in a servant of Saul. Somehow this guy was able, he seems to be kind of a slimy guy if you read later in the story, but he was able to keep his job, to not lose everything in all the chaos. Verse 2, there was a servant of Saul's household named Ziba. They called him to appear before David, and the king said to him, are you Ziba? Your servant, he replied. The king asked, is there no one left of the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness? Ziba answered the king, there is still a son of Jonathan. He is crippled in both feet. Notice his identity is not Mephibosheth. His identity is not who he is. His identity is that crippled son of Jonathan, that last person still living. Yeah, he's a cripple, so he's not going to be much use to you. Where is he? The king asked. Verse 4. Ziba answered, he is at the house of Machir, son of Amiel, in Lo-Debar, which, by the way, Lo-Debar is about as far away from Jerusalem as you get. It's this little tiny town, kind of up across the Jordan River, up out like barely where Israel, the nation of Israel has any dominion. That's where Lo-Debar is. This kid is basically hiding out in a tiny town as far away from the center of action as he can get. Because if somebody finds him, it all could be over. So this guy says, yeah, he's in Lo-Debar. Let's see, verse 5. So King David had him brought from Lo-Debar, from the house of Machir, again, depending on the kindness of someone else, the son of Amiel. When Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor. David said, Mephibosheth, your servant, he replied. Don't be afraid, David said to him, for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your father Saul, or grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table. Mephibosheth bowed down and said, what is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me? Now from just looking at the plot of this story, later on, it basically says, and he lived in David's house happily ever after. You look at the plot of this story, this young prince, with all of the potential in the world from his perspective, a young prince who probably, if nothing changed, would have inherited the throne. He would have been King Mephibosheth, theoretically, if nothing had changed, if Saul had stuck with God and all of that. But he doesn't. Saul doesn't. And so destinies change and fortunes are lost. And this young prince finds himself a cripple in a tiny town in the middle of nowhere, depending on the kindness of someone else, with no hope for the future, with no way to provide for his family, with no way to restore the honor of his fallen family's name. And into that situation, the king comes, calls him to the palace, says, Mephibosheth, you think you're helpless, you think you're hopeless, you think there is no future for you, but I've got news for you, buddy. I'm giving you back the land that your father had. I'm giving you, not only that, but you're going to stay with me. You're living in the palace. You're eating at the king's table. The Bible says basically, you're going to be my son. Obviously, he's never going to inherit the throne, but I'm going to treat you like a son. That's a powerful story in itself. That's a beautiful, you can't tell a fairy tale that has a better plot than that. But I love what this story says about kindness, because that's what David says he's going to show him. If you look at the very beginning, verse 2, or actually verse 1, it says, is there anyone still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness? Think about what that definition in David's mind, because this is what he says kindness looks like. The first thing, and of course I think the most obvious thing for us, and when I say kindness, I'm meaning charity, generosity. The first thing he does that we would think of as kindness is he shows him care. I will provide for you. I will give you everything you need. You have shelter and food and water and all of that. I give you all that stuff. And the problem is a lot of times I think we stop there. We think that's it. I give $2.50 at the Salvation Army kettle around Christmas time. I'm good. I'm a kind person. The amazing thing with what David does with this, though, with this aspect, when he says, you will eat with me, he doesn't just give him care. He doesn't just make sure he's not hungry, that he's warm, all of that. He gives him community too. He makes him part of the family. He makes him part of something, even while he's giving him care. So this isn't just charity, as in paying somebody to help them live. This is bringing this broken, that's literally what the word cripple in the Bible means. It comes from the root that means broken. Bringing this broken soul into his house, making him part of his life, giving him something and people to care about him, a hope for the future. That's all part of this care. But he doesn't just stop there. After that, and not after that, it's kind of mixed up. I'm going about these three things a little bit different order. But when he looks at Mephibosheth, I think the big reason why he's willing to do this, because when he looks at Mephibosheth, where most people especially walking through Lo-Debar, where Mephibosheth is probably sitting on the side of a building begging for money to pay the guy that's taking care of him, when people see that, he's just a beggar. He's just one more beggar on the side of the street. But when David looks at Mephibosheth, he sees Jonathan. He sees, man, you've got Jonathan's eyes. He sees a picture of his best friend. He sees the son of royalty. He sees the son of a man who saved his life. So now it's not simply being nice to a broken soul. Now it's providing care to the child, the child of the man to whom you owe everything. We understand how this works in our lives, how important it is or the effect of seeing, of having a relationship with something, I guess. We had a pug growing up, my family did. And as he got older, old dogs tend to kind of stink and smell. Old pugs are especially bad. They snort and they shed. And eventually, as he got older, he had like a digestive problem. So every night, not every night, but there'd be like twice a week where he'd wake up, 3-4 times a night and have to go outside. And if it was anybody else's dog, I'm like, yeah, I'll just leave him outside, right? Anybody else's dog and you don't want to pet him. Anybody else's dog is just an old dog. But when you have memories with that dog, when you have a relationship in a way with that thing, suddenly all of those things, you miss them all. You ignore them all. Because you have something deeper. You understand something more. That thing, person, dog, whatever it is, means something. It's the same thing for us. I know for me, Friday afternoon, if I have to pick some stuff up from the grocery store, from Walmart or whatever, and I'm walking around the store, there are times when I just want to scream. When there are so many people, and they are the world's slowest people, and I just want to get all my stuff and go home for the weekend, but I can't because I have two families on either side of the aisle, and they're stopped looking at what they're trying to get off the shelves. I think we've all been there. We're just move. In those moments, kindness is really difficult. When you're stuck in traffic, kindness is really difficult. And I think what happens, for me at least, in my experience, the reason it's so difficult is because we see what we want to do, and suddenly all those other people around us are simply obstacles between where we are now and where we want to be. We see them as just objects, people that are in our way, and so get out of my way, people. And I'm not condemning anybody. I've been there. I understand this feeling. This is personal, right? The difference between somebody that is frustrated with people around them and somebody that is consumed by a desire to do kindness for people around them is understanding who those people are. It's a picture of those people as children of royalty, as children of the God who saved your life, as image bearers of your best friend. That changes it all. It's not just one more thing to check off your list. Suddenly these people deserve every minute of your time and every bit of your love. That's what kindness looks like to David. And he shows it, through the caring community, as I said before. But second, he shows it by giving the man dignity. One of the thing you lost immediately, this boy, this Prince Mephibosheth lost immediately upon running from the chaos, is he lost his dignity. He lost his dignity as a royal family member. He lost all the land that his family had historically owned. He lost his dignity as a man who could provide for his family. He lost it all. He lost his identity. And so David says, I am giving you back, and I'll read it actually from the text. David said, verse 7, don't be afraid, I will show you kindness for the sake of your father. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul. In this day, that's identity, that's dignity. In this time, you now own land. Your family has a place in this world. You matter again. You are not just a beggar on the side of the road anymore. Once more, you are the head of a land-owning family. So kindness means caring community, but it also means working to give dignity to the people around us, especially to the broken people around us. Intentionally working to reignite the knowledge of who they are. Because they say, some of the interesting studies I've read on addiction, they're finding out that addiction isn't just you start taking, it's not just a chemical thing where you start taking cocaine or whatever and pretty soon you're addicted. They found out that where there is no connection, addiction thrives. Because there is nothing, there is no love, there is no relationship. They did it with rats, where they put cocaine in the water for rats by themselves, right? This rat is by itself, because rats are social animals. They put cocaine in the water, and this rat just drank the water until it died. They did the same thing, put the same cocaine into water with rats that were in the ideal rat paradise, basically. Everything was perfect. You had the right social dynamics and the right, everything was perfect. And the rats would drink a little out of the cocaine-laced water and then stop and walk away. They never did. These rats would never develop this level of dependency on this drug because they had connection, because they had identity. There's so much about sin and about destructive behaviors that comes from simply losing who you are. When you forget who you are as a person, when you forget you are the son and daughter of God, when you forget people count on you, when you've lost all of those things, there is no reason to strive. There is no reason to reject one thing in favor of something better, to reject the pleasure of today in favor of the benefit for tomorrow. There's no reason to do that. And so David, in his act of kindness, gives this man dignity once again. He gives him an identity once again. He's not Mephibosheth the beggar. He's Prince Mephibosheth, the head of the family of Saul, son of Jonathan, son of Saul. He has a place in the world again. And finally, if we read David's conversation with Ziba after this, verse 9, then the king summoned Ziba, Saul's servant, said to him, I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him and to bring the crops in so that your master's grandson may be provided for. And Mephibosheth, grandson of your master, will always eat at my table. So not only does he give him back the title, you own this land now, he gives him back the ability to use the land, the resources to make use of that dignity, of that identity. He gives him essentially trust, is what it is. Because he could have squandered it, and his family could have squandered it. Later on, they could have come back. The family of Saul could have come back and become David's biggest adversaries. So David gives him the opportunity to be successful, to use the identity, to use the care, to make use of them, and to provide for his family. It says he's got a son. That means that this line is going to continue now. There's hope for the future. And David does it going out on a limb, knowing that it could come back to bite him, but knowing that he has to because it's what's right, because of Jonathan, because of who Mephibosheth is. And I don't know about you, but when I read this story and when I really think through those three things, how often when you look at the intentional extravagance that David showers on Mephibosheth, the son of his best friend, but also the son of his greatest political enemy. You look at the extravagance that David pours on him, the intentionality, the creativity that he shows in his kindness. And I find myself very seldom doing the same thing. As I said before, most of the time when I'm being kind, it's dropping a couple dollar bills into the Salvation Army kettle, and I feel really good about myself. But how often have I taken the time to be intentionally, extravagantly, vulnerably kind to the people I come in contact with? How often do I simply stop and instead of wanting to scream in the middle of Walmart, looking for an opportunity to help these people, to make their time in Walmart better? And the problem with this is if you take this very far at all, you start to feel a twinge of guilt and a twinge of conviction, which can morph into guilt. And if you let that go very far, that grows into something beyond simply guilt. It grows into embarrassment maybe, and if that's the case, you turn away and just kind of hide yourself away from it because, yeah, I'm just not that person. I'm just not that guy. Other people are that way. I just don't have the generous gene. Or you throw yourself into it. Yeah, I'm awesome. I wish you all would be like me because I'm really nice to people. Come on. So this twinge of guilt, this conviction, this need to help people because it seems like the right thing to do, it's better than hating people, but it can lead to something really bad if we're not careful. And the secret to this, the secret to understanding how to be generous, extravagantly and intentionally generous, is found in verse 3. 9 verse 3. The king said, that he's talking to Ziba, "Is there no one still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness?" Other versions say the kindness of God. By the way, the word kindness here, I love this word. If you know one Hebrew word, this is the word to know. Outside of the name of God, obviously. But one Hebrew word, this is the word to know. It's the equivalent to the Greek word agape. It's hesed. It's kindness, hesed. It means kindness, love, faithfulness, loyalty, steadfast. When in the Bible, when it says, give thanks to the Lord for He is good, His love endures forever, or His steadfast love endures forever, or His faithful love endures forever, that's all hesed. So this word kindness is hesed. It's an unconditional willingness to hold to a covenant even when it costs you. It's a love that goes beyond just feeling. It goes into action. And so he says the kindness, the hesed of God is what he's showing to this man. The reason David knew how to show, what kindness to show to Mephibosheth, is not because David was a really good guy. It's because David had seen God do the same thing in his own life. It's because as David started out, he was a boy with no hope for the future. He was the youngest son of 8 boys. That means the only way for him to be the head of the family is if 7 of his brothers died. That's not going to happen. He was a shepherd boy. He's not going to be a warrior. He's not going to be anything. And yet God anoints him, raises him up. He gives him dignity. At every turn, as Saul and the Philistines and everyone comes against him, he gives him care. When he needed it most, he gives him community in the form of Jonathan and his mighty men and Nathan and everyone he needs. And he gives him the trust and the resources to make the most of those things. And so he sees it in his own life and he says, this is what I'm going to show to to Mephibosheth. I understand what this looks like because I've seen it in my own life. This isn't just me arbitrarily showering kindness on a man. This is me taking what I have seen God do for me and do it for this broken young man. For us, as we think about that, we can think of what God has done in our own lives, but it should be even more powerful for us because we haven't just seen God act in our life. We've seen God on the cross. We've seen Him hanging there for us. We've seen Him not just feeding us, not just bringing us to the banquet table of salvation, but trading places with us. Taking what the Bible calls the wrath of God on Himself in our place so that we might know the blessings of being close to God. Giving us the status and the dignity that we lost through sin by becoming an abject criminal in the minds of the authorities, by taking the penalty of the greatest sinner of all of them. By becoming nothing, He gave us everything. And then trusting us with such an amazing mission. A mission that I don't see how He could trust me, or I don't know anybody that would trust any of us to do the thing that God is calling us to do. That is to spread His message, to be His image bearers to the world. He says, here are the resources to make that happen. I trust you. And so we see ourselves, broken souls that we were, made sons of God, provided for in every way, given community and identity and trust and resources and opportunities. And then He says, love your enemies. And then he says, pray for those who have despitefully used you. Not because it's just what you do, but because it's what I did for you. That's what he says to us. The kindness of God is not something we generate ourselves. It's something we experience and pass on. And I think 1 John says it best in our scripture for today. 1 John chapter 4. If I can get there. 1 John chapter 4, starting at verse 7. Dear friends, let us love one another. Why? Because love comes from God. Everyone who knows or who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. That's a powerful statement if you think about it. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how much you know. If you don't know how to love, you don't know God. Dang. Getting back to the word. Verse 8, verse 9. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love. Not that we loved God. We don't earn points for loving God. We don't generate anything special because we loved God. The amazing thing is that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Verse 11, dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. This week, I pray that each of us is saturated with the kindness, with the hesed kindness of God. Amen. In our devotions, that we see that kindness, the lifting up of someone who was broken and lost and hopeless to heights of dignity, security, stability, opportunity. In our conversations, in our outreaches, in our careers, in our jobs this week, let's look for opportunities to give the gifts of caring community to the people around us, of dignity to the people around us, and of greater opportunity and trust to the people around us. Because God gave them to us first. Let's bow our heads. Father in heaven, thank you for this day, for the Sabbath day, that we get to rest and remember that it is all because of you. That it is not our own efforts that cause anything magical to happen. That you reached down into this quagmire of a world and you pulled us out and you gave us everything we are. And I pray that you would let us see that and let it affect how we see the slow people at Walmart this week. We love you so much, Jesus. Amen.